may feel tempted to adjust your set. Well, don't, because this image is not coming to you from a conventional sort of television camera. You probably see that the image is rather noisy, more noisy certainly than you're used to. And in addition, it can't accommodate movement very well. Have a look at this image of my fingers as I move it. Can you see the ghosts trailing along behind them? Well, let's have a look to see what sort of system we're using to get this image. It's a camera that can see in the dark. In fact, it's called an Ebitron type camera, and the crucial component is this here. There's an ordinary television tube at the back. At the front, we have a rather special device called an image intensifier. Well, what we're going to do in this program is to have a look at something of how image intensifiers work, and also two of the ways in which they're being applied in the area of astronomy. But let's start by having a look at some of the principles that underlie all image intensifiers. Well, common to all of them, we have a thing called a photocathode, on which an image is focused. Now, the purpose of this photocathode is to turn the photons coming in into electrons. So that photon there will generate an electron like that. The next thing is to accelerate these electrons right down to the image plane, so that when they get down there, they've got very much more energy. Now, the advantage of that is that we can make sure that we give them enough energy so that when they get to the image plane, whatever happens to them after that, they've certainly got enough energy to be detected. We can't do that to photons because they're already moving at the velocity of light. Now, the other thing that's important about this system is that we preserve the imaging information going from the photocathode to the image plane. The electrons tend to come off in all directions, and we refocus them down on the image plane, and in this way we preserve imaging information. Now, the way in which the various sorts of image intensifier differ is in what happens to the electron next. In one sort, we simply place a photographic emulsion there. Well, let's see how this principle is put to use to help astronomers investigate the nature of distant objects.
Well, this is the 98-inch Isaac Newton telescope in the Royal Greenwich Observatory here in Herstmonceux. One of the interests of astronomers here is in weak galactic sources. Now, in the past, when astronomers wanted to study such sources, all they could do was take their camera, put it at the end of the telescope, and expose the plates for a very long time. In fact, from about the 1970s, late 1960s onwards, it's been possible to apply image intensification techniques to get the information about these weak sources an awful lot more easily and an awful lot more accurately. Well, this shows the inside of one of these devices employing image intensification. This particular one was developed by Dr. McMullen here in the Royal Greenwich Observatory. Well, let's have a look at the key features of the device. The idea is that an image of the distant source is formed at this end of the tube. The photocathode emits electrons, and the distribution of the electrons across the back of the photocathode corresponds to the optical image striking the front. These electrons are then accelerated down the tube by means of a high voltage which is applied through a series of titanium discs. All the way around the outside of the tube here is a coil. We've removed it so we can see what's going on, and it provides an axial magnetic field. And the combination of the electric and the magnetic field forms an image, an electron image, in a plane down about here. The important end, as far as the action is concerned, of this tube is round here. So let's just turn it round and see what goes on. These two side arms here are rather incidental to the story, so I think we'll forget about those. The emulsion that is used is taken and is mounted on a disc like this, which is then fitted to this device here. The function of this is so that the emulsion can be taken and pushed forward so that it's in the plane at which the electron image is in focus. Now, the important bit about this emulsion is it's not the same as any old photographic emulsion. In fact, it's an electron-sensitive emulsion. It's nuclear emulsion. The advantage of using this emulsion is that every time an electron impacts with it, it produces a developable track, produces an image. Now, that's rather different to what happens in ordinary photographic emulsion, where it takes many hundreds of photons to produce a developed grain. There's a very important feature about this camera, and that is that the electrons must impact directly with the emulsion. Now, here's how this is achieved. The emulsion is placed bang up against a thin mica window. The electrons pass readily through the window and onto the emulsion. In fact, if we were to put the emulsion directly in the same chamber as the photocathode and the focusing electrodes, what would happen is that vapors coming out of the emulsion would poison the photocathode. So the two are kept in separate chambers. Although the idea behind this camera is rather easy, a great deal of effort has gone into getting the technology right. For example, the mica window. It's only 4 microns thick. Now, that is not sufficient to seriously degrade the resolution as the electrons travel through them to strike the emulsion which is placed at the other side. In fact, it degrades it so little that resolutions of around about 100 line pairs per millimeter are possible. If you were just to leave this mica window as it is, with a high vacuum on this side and atmospheric pressure on this side, it would explode that way. This particular problem has been got over by having this side of the camera evacuated. In fact, the whole thing has been made pretty automatic, so much so that the operator has simply to load the emulsion here, and with this in, he would insert this unit in here, and by pressing a single button, the entire pump-down system would go into operation. Well, the next thing that we've got to do is get the information out of this film. And that's where this machine comes into our story. It's called a microdensitometer, and in fact, it's just a sophisticated version of the type of densitometer that we sent you in the home kit. What we do is we take our emulsion, so place it here, and switch on. A beam of light is being transmitted through the film. At the end of each scan, the film is advanced and it scans again, rather in the fashion of a TV raster. The diameter of the beam of light is chosen to match the resolution that's being achieved in the telescope. In fact, it's around about a 10 micron beam at the moment. After the beam has come through the film, it travels on up here through some optics up to this head here. And inside this unit up here is a light detector. In fact, it's a photomultiplier. The output from the photomultiplier is fed through some electronics onto magnetic tape where it's stored. Well, once we've got the information stored in the computer, there's a number of things that we can do with it, such as, for example, plotting out a contour map. Well, let's have a look at such a map for a number of galaxies. And here we see the picture being built up. In fact, it's being built up in 2 stages. If we look along any region in which the intensity is the same on the screen, we're looking at a region of the film which has the same optical density. And this corresponds to a region of the galaxy which has the same brightness.
Well, that's the case in which we put a photographic film here. But there is an alternative type of image intensifier. In place of photographic film, we put a substance called a phosphor, the function of which is to convert the single fast energetic electron coming in into many photons coming out. But then we put another photomaterial there, which converts those photons into electrons. So the net effect of this is to convert the single electron coming in into a whole bunch of electrons coming out. We've got electron amplification. Now, in fact, we do this more than once, typically 4 times, so there are 4 stages to the amplification. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the overall effect is to convert the single photon coming in to typically more, or at least 1 million photons coming out. Well, that's the principle. Let's have a look at the hardware.
And here is a piece of the hardware. In fact, it's a commercially produced image intensifier. The photocathode's down this end and the phosphor's at the other. Well, now, the whole of this unit will be put inside a solenoid that provides the focusing field to keep everything in focus. Well, it's a little bit hard to see what's going on here. It's been encapsulated to keep people away from the high voltages. And here is a tube without the encapsulation. It's the 4-stage tube. Down here we have the photocathode, and up here the output phosphor. It's, as I say, made up of 4 stages. Here's the first stage here. You see a couple of rings in here. These, in fact, are electrodes to which the high voltage is applied. Well, there's the first stage, the second, and the third, which more or less repeats the previous stage, right up here to the top to the output phosphor. Well, there's quite a lot of technology in building these tubes. So let's just have a look at the main components that go into them. Starting down here at the bottom with the photocathode, that's formed on this piece of glass here. It's a thick piece of glass, and the photocathode will be put on the other side. Right, well, that's taken care of that end. At the top end, we have our output phosphor, which is this white substance here, which is deposited on the other side of a piece of glass. But if we turn it over, what do we see? We don't see the white at all. What we see is a sort of black surface, but through the black we see some spots of aluminium. In fact, the whole of the phosphor is coated with a layer of aluminium. That allows the high voltage to be applied across the plane of the phosphor. And the black layer there is to stop any of the output photons from finding their way back into the input. Well, as I said, it's a 4-stage tube. And if we look at each one of these stages in turn, we see something like this, a rather hollow-looking tube with a couple of these focusing electrodes inside it. Well, now suppose we wanted to build one of these tubes from scratch, a single-stage tube. How might we do it? Well, I suppose the first thing we'd do is we'd get our photocathode, and we'd plonk it down there, like that. And we now want a phosphor, so here we've got it, so let's put it on top. Well, now we've got to get back to a photocathode again. It wouldn't do, in fact, to put a photocathode directly up here. That's rather a thick piece of glass, and we'd lose a lot of the resolution of the tube. So this is where some more technology comes into its own. Rather than use a thick piece of glass, what is used is a very thin piece of mica. In fact, this piece of mica is only around about 4 microns thick. And onto that piece of mica is deposited the phosphor. And after the phosphor is put on, it of course gets coated in the usual way. There's the black coating. The thing gets mounted in its frame. So there's the phosphor. And the electrons come in here, produce the photons. Right, we've got to get a photocathode on top of that, and that's evaporated onto that surface. In this particular case, it's a layer of antimony which has been activated by vapors of sodium, potassium, and cesium. So that's our crucial sandwich in the middle of this tube. And it's that unit that rests at the top of this stage here. So we now have got the basic component. We repeat this unit up here, and up here. But up here, of course, we have our thick-walled output phosphor.
So that's the other sort of system, but how's it used in practice? Well, one possibility is to stick a television camera down the end here, and that scans the image and builds up an overall picture from a series of snapshots, if you like. Well, a system based on this principle has been used in astronomy at the Isaac Newton telescope at Hurst-Monceau and also overseas. A pioneer in this field is Dr. Alec Boxenberg of University College, London.
I'm interested in recording the light from very faint astronomical sources, both as efficiently as possible and with the minimum of interference from the recording apparatus. Here's the system I use. There's an image intensifier, television camera, which together make up the detector head unit, some processing electronics, which converts the information to a form suitable for a computer, which both stores the information and displays the result on a screen. Let's come back to the detector head unit. Normally this is mounted on a telescope and oriented at all angles, but for today I'm simulating the telescope with this little projector containing a slide of a galaxy. The light from this source enters the first stage of the intensifier, which is inside this coil, and after 4 stages of amplification, the image is picked up by this television camera at the output. The signal from that camera then is shown up on this monitor. I'll switch on the slide and show you the picture of the galaxy. Now, I've, for this demonstration, turned the brightness of the source up very high and the intensifier gain down low. But of course, when observing objects like this in the observatory, they're very far away and exceedingly faint. And to show you what they look like then, I'll turn down this source and also turn the gain up of the intensifier. But before I do that, I'll cover it with this black cloth to stop ambient light leaking in. So, having reduced the brightness of the source and increased the intensifier gain, we end up with a rather motley collection of spots. We can see some bright ones flaring at different points and can make out the shape of the galaxy near the middle of the screen. The large bright spots are ion events created in the intensifier, and some of the smaller spots are also noise from the intensifier in the form of thermal electron noise. We can verify these noise effects by switching off the source. And only thermal electron and ion spots remain. When the apparatus is mounted on the telescope, it's normally cooled sufficiently to remove the thermal noise completely from the picture. So, putting the source back on, we've now got 2 types of events recorded: the ion spots and the genuine photon events from the galaxy. As the ion spots are very large, we can eliminate these electronically. As for the photon spots, you'll notice that they have a variety of sizes. Since each one is created by an individual photon, we want to count the spots with equal weight. This is where the electronics comes in. What's happened now is that all the ion events have been eliminated and all the photon events have been given equal weight or equal size on the screen. In fact, we have a true representation of the input image. Now, at each instant, what we're looking at is a sort of snapshot of the output of the telescope. With my TV system, I'm getting about 50 snapshots a second. So it now remains to add up enough of these images to give as clear a picture as required, and for this we use the computer. Apart from its powers of calculation, the computer has a large data store or memory. Think of this as a vast wall full of pigeonholes. As the photons arrive, each one is put into the appropriate pigeonhole according to its position in the image. The computer does this continuously, and as the data comes in, we can see this storing on the screen here. Let's see what we've got so far. If we program the computer, we can get a display of the store building up to give the picture of our galactic source. The bar moves up the screen as the computer store is repeatedly scanned for the latest arrival of photons. you can begin to pick out the shapes of the galaxy and isolated stars. The lines on the oscilloscope make up a slightly unusual plot, as we can see if we take a slice through the screen horizontally and look in great detail at one individual line, another advantage of the computer system. What each line is doing is building up on an intensity scale the photons arriving along that particular line in the image. And you can see a section of the galaxy in the middle and individual stars, there's a big one on the left, being picked out quite clearly.
Well, in concentrating on the hardware, we have in fact been tending to point to one particular advantage, namely the great sensitivity of image intensifiers. But there are in fact other advantages. So now let's have a look and see what we can learn in imaging terms about these others. For the Macmillan system, it's convenient to consider the advantages in terms of this sort of diagram here. What we've done is to plot photographic density up here against exposure along here. This is rather like the sort of graphs that we were drawing for you in Unit 2. But notice there's one crucial difference. And it is that we've not taken the log of the exposure along this axis. Well, on this kind of plot, ordinary photography comes out like this. Down here, we're in the fog level, and up here, a density rather less than 2, we're saturated. By contrast, electronography really takes off. Goes up there like that. Now, sensitivity is the easiest advantage to draw out of this diagram. Take an exposure, let's say that one there, and have a look at the sort of photographic density we get with conventional photography, and there it is. But with electronography, we get a much greater density, much more sensitive for a given exposure. This is of advantage, for example, when we look at the Crab Nebula. That's the sort of image that you get with electronography. By contrast, the sort of image that one would get were one to do a comparable exposure with conventional photography is as shown in the bottom of the screen. Far less photons are detected. The second advantage I want to draw your attention to is the greater dynamic range of electronography. Now, by dynamic range, I mean the range of change in exposure over which you get a useful change in density. In the case of photography, the ratio of exposures is really quite small for that, whereas in electronography, it's really quite a lot. This is of use when you've got an object in which the intensity varies tremendously from the periphery towards the center. For example, this was taken with electronography and shows contours of equal brightness. Were we to do this with conventional photography and contour it, we would find, for example, that if we got the center right, plotted out in contours, then all the outside region would lie in the fog. We would lose information. Finally, the third advantage I want to draw your attention to is the greater linearity of electronography. This is a straight line all the way up there. For photography, there's no comparable straight line, and this too has its advantages. Now, with the Boxenberg system, in a rough manner of speaking, all you need to do is to replace density here by the intensity output from the tube. And the same three advantages would turn up because the graph would have, roughly speaking, the same sort of form. So here we have two systems with three advantages of greater sensitivity, greater linearity, greater dynamic range than conventional photography. So in a particular case, which one do you use? Well, the answer is beyond the scope of this program, but you can be sure that it depends upon the type of object being imaged and on the type of information that we wish to get out of it.